A cruel millionaire ties a young woman in a wheelchair to the train tracks, but what happens next will leave you breathless. A heroic German shepherd enters the scene, unleashing a chain of events that will change lives forever. A story of courage, redemption, and the power of unconditional love. Prepare for an emotional roller coaster that will touch your heart. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. The solitary howl echoes through the abandoned station. Raindrops slide down rusty beams, each telling silent stories of more prosperous times. The night embraces the place like a dark cloak, interrupted only by occasional lightning that reveals a scene defying human comprehension. A young woman, immobilized in her self-imposed fragility, breathes with difficulty as rough ropes mark her delicate wrists. Sophia tries to move, but her wheelchair lies meters away, an inaccessible island in a sea of despair. The wheels still spin softly, as if mocking her situation. The metal of the tracks vibrates subtly beneath her body, a silent premonition of what is to come. Who could have imagined that her fight to preserve a simple animal shelter would put her on a collision course with one of the most powerful men in the small coastal town? The sky weeps more intensely now, as if nature itself mourns what it witnesses. In the darkness, two amber eyes watch, attentive, calculating, determined. The German shepherd's black and gold fur camouflages him among the shadows, but his protective instinct shines brighter than any darkness. How did we get to this point? How did a 25-year-old physical therapist, known for seeing beauty where others see only rubble, become the target of the relentless fury of Richard Smith, the businessman who transformed the town's landscape with his glass skyscrapers and empty promises? 6 months earlier, Sophia was opening the windows of her small apartment. The sea breeze carried the characteristic smell of salt air and roasted pine nuts, announcing the start of the traditional pine nut festival that colored the town's streets. From her window, she could see the blue-green horizon of the sea contrasting with the intense green of the preserved forest. It was precisely that view that nourished her soul every day, giving her strength to face a world that insisted on placing barriers in her path. "Good morning, Thor," she whispered to the bird that faithfully perched on her windowsill every morning. "Brought any news today?" The rufous-bellied thrush tilted its head as if considering the question. Sophia smiled. Her connection with animals had always transcended the conventional. It was as if every creature sensed in her a gentle soul, incapable of causing harm. The phone rang, interrupting the moment of peace. The voice on the other end sounded worried, almost desperate. "Sophia, you need to come now. We have problems." The voice belonged to Mrs. Clara, a 70-year-old woman who managed the animal shelter on the outskirts of town. The place, once a simple wooden house, had become a refuge for dozens of abandoned animals, thanks to the tireless work of volunteers like Sophia. "What happened?" "They're here, with papers. They say the land has been sold." Sophia's heart pounded. It wasn't the first time they'd heard rumors about the land being sold, but it had never materialized. Until now. "I'm coming." With the skill acquired over years of adaptation, she transferred to her wheelchair in a fluid motion. The chair was not a symbol of limitation, but of freedom, an extension of her body that allowed her to move through the world with independence. Anyone watching her glide through the town's steep streets would never imagine the silent battles she fought daily. Upon arriving at the shelter, the sight that greeted her was heartbreaking. Men in suits measured the land while others carried documents and spoke in authoritative tones to Mrs. Clara, whose stooped shoulders betrayed her helplessness in the face of the situation. "What is happening here?" Sophia's voice echoed firmer than she herself expected. A man about 45 years old turned. His impeccable suit contrasted with the simplicity of the place. Gold-rimmed glasses reflected the sunlight as a calculating smile formed on his thin lips. "Miss Sophia, I presume. I've heard a lot about you. And you would be Richard Smith, but I imagine you already know who I am." Who didn't know Richard Smith? His face was plastered on billboards throughout the town announcing new developments that promised to bring progress and modernity. His eyes, now fixed on Sophia, carried the coldness of someone who saw people only as obstacles or tools. "I know who you are, Mr. Smith. What I don't understand is what you're doing here, disturbing the peace of these animals." Richard laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Business, my dear. This land now belongs to me. I have big plans for it." He held out a folder towards Sophia. "Everything perfectly legal, as you can see. The City Hall approved the project last week." Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she leafed through the documents. Architectural plans revealed a huge luxury resort with a prime view of the sea, exactly where the shelter now stood. "This is impossible. This area is under environmental protection." "Was," Richard corrected, adjusting his tie. "It's surprising how some laws can be reinterpreted when the right people are in power." Indignation surged within Sophia like a wave. "You can't just kick these animals out. Where will they go?" "That's not my problem, miss. You have 30 days to evacuate the premises. After that," he left the sentence hanging, the silence more threatening than any word. As Richard walked away with his assistants, Sophia remained motionless, the document still in her trembling hands. It was then that she noticed a movement near the fence. A large German shepherd watched her with disconcerting intensity. The animal seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, his intelligent eyes fixed on hers as if trying to communicate something. "Whose dog is this?" she asked Mrs. Clara. "I've never seen him before. He showed up this morning just before they arrived." Sophia slowly extended her hand. The German shepherd approached cautiously, sniffing her fingers before allowing a pet. A worn leather collar indicated a name. "Hercules." "Hello, Hercules," Sophia murmured. "Looks like you arrived just in time. We need all the help we can get. Now." The following days were filled with intense mobilization. Sophia, with her unwavering determination, gathered environmental activists, lawyers, and concerned residents. The curious thing was that wherever she went, Hercules accompanied her like a silent guardian. No one knew who the dog belonged to, but his loyalty to Sophia was unquestionable. On a particularly frustrating afternoon, after another fruitless meeting with city council members who refused to re-examine the case, Sophia found herself alone, on the beach, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange. Hercules lay down beside her, his warm body offering silent comfort. "You know, Hercules, sometimes I wonder if I'm being naive. How can I fight against someone like Richard Smith? He has money, power, connections." The German shepherd raised his head, his eyes fixed on hers as if to say, "You have something more valuable." It was at that moment that Sophia noticed a solitary figure walking along the beach. A teenage girl, about 16, dark hair tied in a messy ponytail, eyes lost on the horizon. There was something familiar about her face. Hercules suddenly stood up, running towards the girl. Sophia called him back, worried about the young woman's reaction. But to her surprise, the teenager knelt down, hugging the dog with familiarity. "Do you know this dog?" Sophia asked, approaching. The young woman hesitated, her eyes studying Sophia cautiously. "Maybe. He's been showing up with me the last few days. The collar says his name is Hercules." A brief smile lit up the teenager's face. "Yes, that's Hercules. He used to be mine." "Used to?" "Dad gave him away for training 2 months ago. Said we didn't have room for him anymore since we moved to the penthouse apartment." There was bitterness in her voice. "I didn't know he was around." Here, Sophia watched the interaction between the girl and the dog, pure love and longing. "I'm Sophia, by the way." The young woman hesitated again before replying. Laura Smith." The last name hit Sophia like a punch. "Smith, you're Richard Smith's daughter?" "Yes, that's my burden." Laura laughed without humor. "You don't have to look at me like that. I'm not like him." The silence that followed was charged with possibilities. Two strangers united by a dog and separated by a conflict that grew daily. Who could have imagined that this casual encounter would change the course of events? In the following weeks, Laura became a frequent visitor to the shelter, always accompanied by Hercules, who seemed to have found a mission: to unite two seemingly opposite souls for a common cause. "Dad wasn't always like this," Laura confided one afternoon, while helping Sophia medicate a rescued puppy. After Mom died, something changed in him. It's like he needs to prove something to the world, or maybe to himself. What happened to your mom? Sophia asked softly. Cancer. 5 years ago. She loved places like this, you know. Dad built a bird sanctuary for her at our old house. I don't understand how he can want to destroy something similar now. The pieces began to fit together. A man transformed by loss, channeling his pain into excessive ambition. But understanding didn't mean accepting. The campaign to save the shelter gained momentum. The community, initially divided between supporting the progress promised by the resort or preserving the animal sanctuary, began to lean towards Sophia's side. Her passionate speeches, held in town squares and schools, touched hearts. It wasn't just about animals, she said, but about the future they wanted to build, one where profit didn't outweigh compassion. Richard Smith watched it all with growing irritation. His projects, once approved without question, now faced public scrutiny. Investors hesitated, the city hall backed down, and all because of a young woman in a wheelchair who refused to accept defeat. She's becoming a bigger problem than I anticipated, he commented to his assistant, while watching another local news report about the mobilization around the shelter. And my own daughter seems to have been recruited to the cause. Perhaps it's time for a more direct approach, Mr. Smith? Richard looked at his assistant with a dangerous glint in his eyes. Perhaps it is, Gustav. Perhaps it is. The next morning, Sophia found the shelter vandalized. Broken windows, forced doors, food scattered on the floor. More disturbing still, the animals' medical records had disappeared, along with documents proving the land's origin. This wasn't a simple act of vandalism, Sophia concluded as Mrs. Clara wept silently. Someone knew exactly what to look for. That same afternoon, upon returning home after an exhausting day of cleaning and reorganizing, Sophia found her apartment ransacked. Her research on the environmental protection area, carefully organized in folders, had disappeared. On the wall, written in what appeared to be red lipstick, "Give up while you can." Fear, a long-forgotten sensation, crept into her thoughts. But Sophia had learned early on that fear, when confronted, becomes merely a counselor, never a master. It was that night, while the storm battered the small coastal town, that Sophia received an anonymous message. Abandoned station. Midnight. Bring what's left of your evidence. She knew it could be a trap, that the sensible thing would be to call the local police. But the local police were known for their loyalty to the mayor, who in turn owed favors to Richard Smith. Who could she really trust? Hercules, who rarely left her side now, let out a low whine when Sophia began to prepare to leave. You think it's a bad idea too, don't you? She sighed, stroking the German shepherd's ears. But what choice do we have? The 30 days are up tomorrow. If we don't do something now. The rain intensified as Sophia arrived at the abandoned station. The place, once a meeting point for residents traveling to the larger city, had been forgotten for decades, a victim of modernization that favored road transport. Ironic how progress also left victims in its wake. Hercules followed by her side, alert to every shadow, every sound. The wheelchair moved with difficulty over the uneven ground, but Sophia was determined. In her bag, she carried the only evidence that had escaped the theft. Old photos of the shelter land, showing indigenous markings suggesting the area might have historical importance for the indigenous peoples. Miss Sophia, glad you could make it. The voice came from the shadows, causing Hercules to growl in alert. Richard Smith emerged under the faint light of a distant lamppost, his suit impeccable even under the torrential rain. Mr. Smith, I should have guessed. Who else would it be? We're well past the point of intermediaries now, don't you think? Sophia stood firm despite the growing fear. What do you want from me? What do I want? Richard laughed, a bitter sound that was lost among the thunder. I want you to understand your place in this story, miss. You're a footnote, a temporary obstacle. If I'm so insignificant, why did you go to the trouble of luring me here? Richard approached, his steps deliberately slow. Because I admire persistence. It's a quality I value in my adversaries, but I also know when persistence becomes self-destructive stubbornness. It was then that Sophia noticed other figures emerging from the shadows, burly men, likely security guards. Hercules positioned himself protectively in front of her. "Nice dog," Richard commented. "Looks familiar. Ah, yes, he looks like the one I gave my daughter before I became the villain of the story. What happened to him anyway? Laura never tells me. Perhaps she has her reasons." Richard's gaze hardened. "My daughter is young, impressionable. You've filled her head with impractical idealism. But she'll learn, just like you." A quick movement of his hand and the men advanced. Hercules barked fiercely, but he was outnumbered. Sophia tried to back away, but the wheels of her chair sank into the loose gravel. "What are you doing?" she shouted as strong hands grabbed her arms, lifting her from the chair. "Teaching a lesson, miss, about the consequences of getting in the way of progress." The world spun as they dragged her to the abandoned tracks. Rough ropes wrapped around her wrists, tying her to the cold metal. The rain lashed, her face mixing with involuntary tears. "You're insane. These tracks aren't used anymore, but this is kidnapping. It's a crime." Richard knelt beside her, his face a mask of false concern. "There's no crime without evidence, miss. And who would believe you against me? By the way, nothing will happen. If you promise to give up, sign the documents agreeing to end your campaign, and all this will just be an unpleasant night to remember." An assistant approached, holding papers protected by plastic. Sophia turned her face away. "Never." "Ah, Sophia, so predictable in your nobility." Richard stood up, adjusting the sleeves of his suit. "Leave her here. The night will be long and cold. Perhaps a few hours of reflection will change your perspective." As the men began to walk away, Hercules, who had been temporarily restrained, broke free with an explosion of strength. The German shepherd lunged, his teeth finding Richard's leg before the security guards could intervene. The businessman screamed in pain as he was dragged away from the enraged animal. Control that beast, kill him if necessary. But Hercules was too fast, too intelligent. He dodged the men, disappearing into the darkness while they attended to their injured boss. "Let's get out of here," Richard ordered, leaning on his assistants. "She's not worth the risk. We'll come back in the morning when she's more receptive." Sophia watched them leave, fear giving way to despair. The rain continued relentless, soaking her clothes, turning the cold into a torment. She tried to free herself, but the ropes were tightly tied. "Hercules," she called softly, hoping the German shepherd was still nearby. No answer came but the howling wind. Minutes turned into hours. Exhaustion began to overcome fear, her eyes closing against her will. It was then that a distant bark penetrated the fog of her consciousness. Hercules was returning, but he wasn't alone. "My God, Sophia!" It was Laura's voice. The teenager ran to the tracks, her hands trembling as she tried to untie the ropes. "Laura? How did you find me?" Hercules showed up at the house, completely soaked and agitated. He practically dragged me here. The ropes finally gave way under her efforts. "I can't believe, Dad, that he would do. We need to get out of here," Sophia interrupted, trying to move. Her legs, always useless, now seemed to weigh tons due to the cold and dampness. Laura helped her sit up. "Your chair, I don't know where it is. Do you have a phone? We need to call someone." The young woman nodded, but before she could act, headlights illuminated the abandoned station. A car was approaching. "Is it him? Is he back?" Panic colored Sophia's voice. Laura peered through the station's broken window. "No, I don't know that car." The vehicle parked and a solitary figure emerged. A middle-aged man wearing a dark overcoat that partially protected him from the rain. Hercules ran towards him, his tail wagging in recognition. "Miss Sophia!" The man approached cautiously. "My name is Edward Jones. I believe we have a common enemy." Edward revealed himself to be a former partner of Richard Smith, who had left years before when he questioned the company's environmentally destructive practices. Since then, he had collected evidence of Richard's illegal activities. "Is Hercules yours?" Sophia asked as Edward helped her into the car with Laura by her side. Yes, he was trained for assistance but also for protection. I put him on watch over Richard and his operation when I learned about the plans for the shelter. So that day, when he showed up at the shelter, Edward smiled. He was fulfilling his mission. I didn't expect him to form such a strong bond with you, much less that he would reunite with Laura. The teenager stroked the German shepherd, who rested his head on her lap. That's why he seemed so familiar when I saw him with Sophia on the beach. He's not the same Hercules I had, but they were brothers from the same litter, Edward explained. Your dad kept one, I kept the other. When I learned he had gotten rid of Laura's dog, I became even more determined to expose his true intentions. The car drove through the town's deserted streets. The storm began to subside, as if nature recognized that the worst had passed. Where are we going? Sophia asked. To a safe place. I have all the evidence we need against Richard. Documents, showing how he bribed public officials to redesignate the environmental protection area. Forged reports, even evidence of witness intimidation. Why didn't you report it before? Edward sighed, heavily. I needed more. Richard has powerful connections, friends in strategic positions. An accusation without strong evidence would be dismissed before the investigation even began. And now, thanks to you, we have something more valuable than any document. Public opinion. Your campaign exposed Richard like I never could. People are paying attention, questioning. Fear is changing sides. Laura remained silent, absorbing every word. Her world was collapsing. The image she had of her dad destroyed by his own actions. He wasn't always like this, she finally murmured, echoing what she had told Sophia weeks earlier. After Mom died, Edward looked at her in the rear view mirror, his expression softening. Losing Beatrice changed all of us, Laura, but it doesn't justify what he became. Sometimes pain reveals who we truly are. The next morning, the sun rose on a transformed town. News of Sophia's kidnapping spread quickly, amplified by Laura's presence as a witness, Richard's own daughter testifying against him. Richard's company headquarters were surrounded by protesters. Journalists vied for exclusive interviews. The mayor, feeling the winds of change, announced an immediate review of all projects approved in recent years. This is bigger than us now, Edward commented, as they watched the coverage on television in the small apartment where they had taken refuge. Richard made many enemies along the way, people who were just waiting for an opportunity. Sophia felt no joy, just a strange relief. What will happen to the shelter? If everything goes as planned, the area will be officially declared an Indigenous Cultural Reserve, with permission to maintain the shelter as it is. Your old photos were crucial for this. Laura, who had spent the night in contemplative silence, finally spoke. I want to testify. Against Dad. About everything I've seen and heard over the years. Laura, are you sure? He's still your dad, Sophia pondered. Precisely. Someone needs to make him see what he's become. The Pine Nut Festival, which traditionally marked the town's spring rebirth, became the setting for the final confrontation. Richard Smith, cornered by accusations and the abandonment of allies, agreed to participate in a televised public debate, his last attempt to control the narrative. On the stage set up in the town square, Sophia and Richard sat face to face. The crowd, silent in anticipation, witnessed the confrontation between the David and Goliath of their time. Miss Sophia, Richard began, his voice still carrying the confidence of someone who rarely lost. You started a campaign based on emotions and half-truths. My project would bring jobs, tourism, prosperity to this town that is so languishing. You confuse prosperity with profit, Mr. Smith, Sophia replied calmly. One benefits everyone, the other, only a selected few. I'm a practical man. Dreams don't feed families. Neither do resorts feed souls. Sophia smiled gently. You talk so much about progress, but you've forgotten what it truly means to move forward. It's not about building higher, but about building more justly. The debate continued, punctuated by applause and protests from the crowd. Richard maintained his facade of civility, but his eyes betrayed growing despair. When Edward presented documents proving the irregularities in the projects, the businessman began to falter. "Documents can be forged," he tried to deflect. "My reputation speaks for itself." It was then that Laura stepped onto the stage, against all expectations. Her young face showed determination beyond her years. "Dad," her voice trembled slightly, "you always taught me to stand up for the truth, to honor Mom's memory." Richard's face paled. "Laura, what are you doing? This isn't your place." "My place is by the side of truth, as yours was, before you forgot it." The silence that followed was deafening. In the front row, Hercules watched intently, as if understanding the importance of that moment. "You destroyed the bird sanctuary you built for Mom," Laura continued. "You said it was necessary to move on, but it wasn't about moving on. It was about forgetting, about burying the pain instead of facing it." Richard's defenses visibly crumbled. "You don't understand. Everything I did, every decision was to ensure your future." "What future, Dad? One where rivers are contaminated by your projects? Where forests give way to concrete? Where animals lose their homes so rich people can have another vacation house?" The crowd watched, hypnotized by the family drama unfolding before their eyes. It was no longer about business or politics, but about loss, pain, and the price of forgetting. "Beatrice loved that shelter," Laura finally revealed. "She volunteered there, before she got sick. You promised her you would always protect it." Richard staggered as if he had been physically struck. His hands, always steady in million-dollar deals, now trembled. How did you know that?" "I found her diary last year. And letters. So many letters she wrote to you during her illness, talking about her fears, her desires for the future, for our future." Tears, real and unexpected, welled up in the businessman's eyes. The mask of corporate coldness completely disintegrated. "I couldn't look at that place anymore," he confessed, his voice almost inaudible. "Every animal, every volunteer, everything reminded me of her, of what I lost, of what I would never have again." "So you decided to destroy it?" Sophia's voice was gentle, devoid of accusation. "So you wouldn't have to feel? So I wouldn't have to remember." Richard's emotional outburst surprised everyone. "Don't you understand? Every project, every building, every change in the landscape was to erase the world she knew, to build one where her absence wouldn't hurt so much." The silence that followed was deep, almost reverential. The crowd, previously divided between supporters and critics, unified in universal compassion for the human pain exposed in its rawest form. Laura approached her dad, taking his trembling hands in hers. "Mom wouldn't want to be remembered this way, through the destruction of what she loved." Richard Smith, the powerful businessman who had transformed the town's landscape, broke down in tears in his daughter's arms. There was no more debate, no more confrontation, just the common recognition of human fragility. In the days that followed, the town witnessed a transformation no one could have predicted. Richard Smith, in a gesture that shocked allies and critics, announced the creation of a foundation in memory of Beatrice. The shelter land would not only be preserved but expanded, becoming a conservation and environmental education center. "I cannot undo the harm I caused," he declared at a press conference, "but I can choose a different path from here on." Sophia, alongside Edward and Mrs. Clara, watched the changes with cautious hope. Redemption rarely came without setbacks, she knew, but every small step counted. "Do you believe he has truly changed?" she asked Edward as they watched the shelter expansion work begin. "I believe he is trying. And sometimes trying is the greatest act of courage we can offer." Hercules, now officially adopted by Sophia, rested beside her wheelchair. The German shepherd, who had united unlikely destinies, had become a symbol of the peaceful resistance that had transformed the community. A year later, at the same Pine Nut Festival that had marked the beginning of the journey, Sophia was giving a lecture at the newly inaugurated Beatrice Smith Conservation Center. The place, once a simple wooden shelter, was now a modern complex that harmonized perfectly with the surrounding nature. In the front rows, Laura smiled while stroking Hercules' ears. Beside her, Richard Smith watched intently, his face marked by new lines, some of sadness, others of wisdom acquired late. Our story is not about heroes and villains, Sophia concluded, her voice echoing through the packed auditorium. It's about imperfect human beings trying to find meaning in a world we don't always understand. About losses that define us and choices that redefine us. Her eyes met Richard's briefly, a silent understanding passing between former adversaries. It's about recognizing that sometimes our greatest obstacles are not external, but internal, and that our true strength is not in never falling, but in how we choose to get back up. As the audience applauded, Sophia looked through the panoramic window that offered a privileged view of the preserved forest, and beyond it, the ocean that embraced the town. The same horizon she had watched from her window on that morning that now seemed so distant. The sky began to paint itself with the colors of dusk, the same daily spectacle that never repeated itself completely. Like life, Sophia thought. Familiar in its outlines, but always offering new nuances to those willing to truly look. Hercules approached, resting his head on her lap as he always did when he felt she needed comfort. Sophia smiled, stroking the soft fur of the animal who had transformed her personal struggle into a community revolution. "We're just getting started, friend," she whispered to the German shepherd. "Just getting started." And as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with promises, the small coastal town breathed in unison, no longer divided between progress and preservation, but united in the understanding that true advancements only happen when we walk together, recognizing our shared humanity in every step of the way. The solitary howl that once echoed through the abandoned station had transformed into a chorus of hope. The rain that once beat down mercilessly gave way to a new dawn, and Sophia, the physical therapist who saw beauty where others saw only limitations, discovered that her greatest strength had always been not in her physical ability to move through the world, but in the courage to move hearts and minds towards a more compassionate future. Because in the end, it is not our circumstances that define our journey, but how we choose to face them. And in that daily choice, in that silent persistence in the face of adversity, we find our true nature and the transformative power that resides within each of us.